Wealthy heir forced to marry a humble employee to save the family business. Look what happened. Subscribe so you don't miss our exciting stories. Maxwell Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the autumn rain blur the Chicago skyline. His fingers gripped the latest financial report so tightly that the paper crumpled at the edges. Blackwood Industries, the shipping empire his grandfather had built from nothing, was falling apart. "There has to be another way," Maxwell said, turning to face his father's longtime lawyer and friend, Harold Bennett. The elderly attorney sat in one of the leather chairs, his expression grave. "The merger agreement with Preston Global is ironclad, Maxwell. The morality clause is specific. They won't proceed unless the CEO is married. They're an old-fashioned company with traditional values. Your father's reputation for wild behavior has made them wary. They need assurance that the next generation is stable." Maxwell ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every movement. At 32, he'd spent the past 5 years cleaning up his father's messes, rebuilding client trust, and modernizing operations. Now, just as they were on the brink of the merger that would save everything, this absurd requirement threatened to destroy it all. "I have 3 months to get married? This is ridiculous. It's 2024, not 1924. Harold adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. 2 months, actually. The wedding must take place before the merger closing date. And there's more. They've added a specific requirement about who you can marry." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "What requirement?" "To prove this isn't just a convenience marriage, they insist you marry someone who's been employed by Blackwood Industries for at least 2 years, someone who understands the business from the ground up." Harold paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Someone who isn't from your usual social circle. They want me to marry an employee?" Maxwell's voice rose in disbelief. "That's not just ridiculous, it's potentially illegal. I could be sued for harassment just by proposing the idea, which is why we need to handle this delicately." Harold stood, walking to the window. "I've taken the liberty of having HR prepare a list of potential candidates, single women with clean employment records and at least 2 years of service. We'll approach this professionally, with proper legal documentation and witnesses." Maxwell's mind raced. The merger wasn't just about money, it was about protecting the livelihoods of over 5,000 employees. His father's reckless spending and scandal-plagued final years had left the company vulnerable. Without this merger, they'd be forced to sell off divisions, lay off workers, and possibly face bankruptcy. "Show me the list," he said finally, his voice tight with resignation. Harold pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the desk. Maxwell opened it, scanning the names and photographs. Most were middle management or administrative staff, exactly the sort of people he barely noticed in his day-to-day operations. But one photo made him pause. "Sarah Chen," he read aloud. "Logistics department." "Ah, yes," Harold nodded. "She's been with the company for 4 years. Started in the mailroom, worked her way up to logistics coordinator. Excellent performance reviews, professional demeanor, no office relationships or drama. She has an MBA from a state school, which she earned while working here full-time." Maxwell studied the photo. Sarah Chen wasn't what he typically looked for in a woman. She was pretty in a simple way, with intelligent eyes and a reserved smile. Her employee photo showed her in a practical blazer, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She looked competent, reliable, everything his father's series of trophy wives had not been. "Set up a meeting," Maxwell said, closing the folder. "But Harold, this stays between us. No one can know about the marriage requirement. If word gets out that we're this desperate, the merger could fall apart anyway." "Of course, I'll arrange everything." Harold gathered his papers, then paused at the door. "Maxwell, I know this isn't ideal, but sometimes the things we think will ruin us end up saving us in ways we never expected." After Harold left, Maxwell returned to the window, watching sheets of rain transform the city into a watercolor of grays and blacks. He thought about Sarah Chen, probably working several floors below, completely unaware that she was about to receive the strangest business proposal of her life. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found her division head's number. Time to arrange that meeting. But as he pressed the call button, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was he really prepared for what this would mean? Marriage, even a business arrangement, wasn't something that could be managed like a shipping route or a profit margin. For the first time in years, Maxwell Blackwood felt completely out of his depth, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his late mother's whispered that pride always comes with a price. Sarah Chen was having a peculiar morning. First, her division head had called her into his office, nervously informing her that the CEO wanted a meeting immediately. Then, a security escort arrived to accompany her to the executive floor, where she'd never set foot in her 4 years at Blackwood Industries. Now she sat in an opulent waiting room, her practical black blazer and sensible heels feeling somehow inadequate among the marble floors and original artwork. Her mind raced through possible scenarios. Had there been a problem with one of her logistics reports? Was there a shipping crisis she'd missed? The heavy wooden doors opened, and Harold Bennett emerged. "Ms. Chen, Mr. Blackwood will see you now." Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt and squaring her shoulders. She'd worked too hard to let intimidation get the better of her. The office she entered was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Chicago's skyline. Maxwell Blackwood stood behind his desk, and Sarah's first thought was that the corporate photographs didn't do him justice. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary, with dark hair and sharp features that spoke of old money and expensive schools. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, steel grey and calculating, currently studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming up," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "Please, have a seat." Sarah sat, acutely aware of Harold Bennett hovering near the door. Something about this setup felt wrong. This wasn't a normal meeting about logistics or shipping routes. "I'll be direct," Maxwell said, sitting down and folding his hands on his desk. "I have a business proposition for you, one that would involve a significant promotion and compensation package." Sarah's back stiffened. What kind of proposition? Marriage. The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah waited for the punchline, but Maxwell's expression remained serious. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "I must have misheard you." "You didn't." Maxwell leaned forward. "I need to get married within the next 2 months. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You would be generously compensated, promoted to an executive position, and after a suitable period, let's say 2 years, we would divorce amicably. You would retain certain benefits and a significant settlement." Sarah felt as if she'd stepped into an alternate reality. She looked at Harold Bennett, then back at Maxwell. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I assure you, Ms. Chen, this is entirely serious." Maxwell's voice remained perfectly calm, as if he were discussing a shipping contract. "You were selected from a pool of candidates based on your professional record and character. The marriage would be governed by a detailed contract, protecting both parties' interests." Sarah stood up so quickly, her chair skidded backward. "Selected? Like a product from a catalogue?" Her voice shook with anger. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what kind of person you think I am, but I'm not for sale." "This isn't about buying you," Maxwell said, standing as well. "It's a mutually beneficial business arrangement. You've worked here for 4 years, watching others with half your talent get promoted because they had the right connections. This is an opportunity." "An opportunity," Sarah cut him off, her usual professional demeanor cracking. "To be your corporate prop? To pretend to be in love with someone who sees marriage as just another business transaction?" She shook her head, disgusted. "You really don't see anything wrong with this, do you?" Maxwell's composed facade flickered for a moment. "Ms. Chen, there are larger considerations at play. The company is more important than basic human dignity, than real relationships and actual love." Sarah gathered her things, hands trembling with anger. "You know what the worst part is? You probably thought I'd be grateful. The poor little logistics coordinator, lucky to catch the eye of the mighty CEO." She walked to the door, then turned back. "I've worked hard for everything I've achieved here, Mr. Blackwood. My integrity isn't for sale, no matter the price tag." She left before he could respond, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor. As she waited for the elevator, she could feel tears of anger threatening to spill. How dare he? How dare he think he could just buy a wife like ordering new office furniture? Back in his office, Maxwell stood at the window, his carefully constructed plan in shambles. Sarah Chen had not reacted at all as he'd expected. Instead of seeing the practical advantages, she'd looked at him like he was something scraped off the bottom of her shoe. "That could have gone better," Harold said dryly. Maxwell shot him a glare. "Find someone else. There must be another candidate who—" "There isn't time," Harold interrupted. "And frankly, her reaction proves why she's the perfect choice. She has integrity, principles, exactly what Preston Global is looking for in this merger. She despises me. She despises what you did, not who you are." Harold gathered his papers. "Fix it, Maxwell. Find a way to show her you're not just a privileged CEO playing with people's lives. Because without this merger, it's not just your future at stake. It's the livelihoods of thousands of employees." After Harold left, Maxwell sat heavily in his chair, Sarah Chen's words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, someone had looked past his position and wealth and seen him exactly as he was and found him wanting. The realization was both infuriating and strangely compelling. He pulled up her employee file on his computer, studying it more carefully this time. Sarah Chen had worked the night shift in the mailroom while putting herself through business school. She'd earned every promotion through merit, not connections. Her performance reviews consistently praised her integrity and work ethic. Maxwell opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small photo frame he kept hidden there. In it, his parents smiled at the camera, young and apparently in love. 6 months after this photo was taken, his father had traded his mother in for a younger model, the first of many trophy wives who had helped destroy both the family name and the company's reputation. Maybe Sarah Chen was right to be disgusted. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with his approach. But he couldn't let the company fail. He had to find a way to make this work, not by buying her compliance, but by earning her trust. The question was, how do you earn the trust of someone who has every reason to believe you're exactly the kind of person they despise? The next week was the longest of Sarah Chen's career. She threw herself into her work, trying to forget the humiliating meeting in the CEO's office. But Maxwell Blackwood seemed to be everywhere. She'd catch glimpses of him in the lobby, in the cafeteria, even passing through her department, places she'd never seen him before. Each time, he looked like he wanted to approach her, but she managed to avoid direct contact until she couldn't. It was late Friday evening, and Sarah was working overtime to finish a critical shipping analysis. Most of the office had cleared out hours ago, leaving behind that peculiar silence that settles over empty workspaces. She was so focused on her spreadsheets that she didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her desk. "You're here late," Maxwell said quietly. Sarah's fingers froze over her keyboard. "The Singapore route analysis is due Monday," she replied without looking up. "Some of us actually have to work for a living." "I deserve that," he acknowledged, and something in his tone made her finally look at him. He'd loosened his tie and his sleeves were rolled up, less CEO, more human. "But I think you should know why I'm asking for this impossible thing." "Mr. Blackwood, Maxwell," he interrupted, "and please just hear me out. Not here. Let me buy you dinner." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity got the better of her. Fine, but somewhere public. 20 minutes later, they sat in a small Chinese restaurant several blocks from the office. Sarah had chosen it deliberately, hardly the kind of place Maxwell Blackwood would normally frequent. To his credit, he didn't even blink at the plastic tablecloths and fluorescent lighting. "My father destroyed more than just his marriages," Maxwell began after they'd ordered. He nearly destroyed everything my grandfather built. The drinking, the scandals, the endless stream of gold diggers he married. He paused, studying his water glass. By the time he died 2 years ago, Blackwood Industries was hemorrhaging clients and money. I remember, Sarah said. There were layoffs in every department. What most people don't know is how bad it really was, still is. Maxwell leaned forward, lowering his voice. Without this merger with Preston Global, we'll have to start selling off divisions within 6 months. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. The company my grandfather built from nothing will be torn apart and sold to the highest bidders. Sarah absorbed this, thinking of her colleagues, of Jim in accounting with 3 kids in college, of Maria in HR who was supporting her sick mother, of dozens of others who depended on their jobs. And the marriage requirement, she asked. Preston Global is old-fashioned. They've watched how my father's scandals affected our company's stability. They want assurance that history won't repeat itself. He smiled bitterly. They think marriage equals stability. More specifically, marriage to someone who understands the business from the ground up, not a socialite looking for a wealthy husband. That's why you chose me, because I'm not a socialite. I chose you because in 4 years, you've shown more integrity and dedication than most people show in a lifetime. He met her eyes directly. Your file shows someone who works hard, treats people fairly, and never compromises her principles, exactly what this company needs. Pretty words, Sarah said, but you still tried to buy me with promotions and money. You didn't even consider that I might have my own dreams, my own plans for my life. You're right, Maxwell admitted. I approached this like every other business problem. Find a solution, make an offer, close the deal. I didn't consider your feelings, and for that I apologize. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Sarah picked up her chopsticks, watching as Maxwell somewhat awkwardly attempted to do the same. Here, she said, reaching across the table to adjust his grip. Like this. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Sarah pulled back quickly, but not before noticing how warm his hands were. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I have plans, Sarah said finally. Goals. I'm not interested in being anyone's corporate wife. What are your goals? Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. I want to revolutionize logistics systems for small businesses, level the playing field so they can compete with bigger companies. She shrugged. I've been developing a software platform in my spare time. It's nothing fancy, but... Show me, Maxwell interrupted. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her tablet. For the next hour, she walked him through her project, a streamlined system that would help small businesses optimize their shipping and inventory management. To her surprise, Maxwell asked intelligent questions and offered genuine insights. This is brilliant, he said finally. Why haven't you shown this to anyone? I tried, actually. Sent it up the chain 6 months ago. It got buried in middle management somewhere. Maxwell's expression darkened. That's exactly the kind of short-sighted thinking that's holding us back. He paused, considering something. What if we made a different kind of deal? I'm not marrying you, Sarah said immediately. Hear me out. Yes, I still need a wife for the merger, but what if this was more than just a business arrangement? What if it was a partnership? He leaned forward intently. Marry me, help me save the company, and I'll give you full resources to develop and launch your platform. Complete creative control, your own division, everything you need to make your vision a reality. Sarah stared at him, caught off guard by the offer. You're still trying to buy me? No, I'm trying to show you that I see your value beyond just this marriage situation. You have brilliant ideas that could help thousands of small businesses. I have the resources to make those ideas reality. He spread his hands. 2 years, that's all I'm asking. Help me save 5,000 jobs, and I'll help you achieve your dreams. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. With Blackwood's resources, her platform could help so many struggling small businesses. But the cost, what about love? She asked quietly. Don't you want that someday? A real marriage? Something vulnerable flickered across Maxwell's face. I watched my father destroy love, Over and over, I watched my mother's heart break. Watched him trade in wives like cars. He swallowed hard. Love is a luxury I can't afford. But maybe a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals is worth more anyway. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Lucy. 911, Dad's in hospital again. Heart problems. Coming? Sarah's hands shook as she read the message. Her father's mounting medical bills were already overwhelming, and his insurance was barely covering the basics. Maxwell noticed her distress. What's wrong? Nothing, Sarah said automatically, gathering her things. I have to go. Family emergency. Let me help, Maxwell offered, standing. You can't fix everything with money, Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her harshness. I'm sorry, I need to go. She hurried out of the restaurant into the cool night air, her mind spinning. Behind her, she heard Maxwell call out, "Think about it, Sarah, please." At the hospital, Sarah sat beside her father's bed, listening to the steady beep of monitors. Lucy had fallen asleep in a chair, but Sarah couldn't rest. Her father looked so small in the hospital bed, so far from the strong man who had raised 2 daughters alone after their mother died. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. He needs surgery, soon, but without better insurance. Sarah pulled out her phone and looked at the last email Maxwell had sent her before their dinner meeting. The formal contract, spelling out all the terms of the proposed marriage arrangement. 2 years of her life in exchange for saving thousands of jobs, launching her platform, and premium family health insurance coverage. She thought about her colleagues at Blackwood Industries, about her father's mounting medical bills, about her dream of helping small businesses compete in a world dominated by corporate giants. She thought about Maxwell's vulnerable expression when he talked about his father, about the way he'd actually listened to her ideas. Was it really selling out if you did something for the right reasons? With trembling fingers, Sarah opened her email and began to type, "Mr. Blackwood, regarding your proposal." Back in his penthouse apartment, Maxwell sat in the darkness, holding the photo of his parents. He thought about Sarah's question about love, about the way she'd instinctively reached out to help him with the chopsticks, about the passion in her eyes when she talked about her project. His phone lit up with an incoming email. When he saw Sarah's name, his heart stopped for a moment. He opened the message, read it twice, then closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Everything was about to change. He just wasn't sure anymore if it was only about saving the company, or if he was starting to want something more, something he'd sworn he'd never risk. The wedding was a small, private affair, exactly the opposite of what the Chicago Society pages had expected from Maxwell Blackwood. Only immediate family, close friends, and key Preston Global executives attended the ceremony at City Hall, followed by an intimate reception at a boutique hotel. Sarah wore a simple ivory dress, her father in his best suit proudly walking her down the aisle, despite his still recovering health. The press release went out immediately after. Maxwell Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, weds longtime employee Sarah Chen in private ceremony. The business world buzzed with speculation about the unexpected match, but the Preston Global executives seemed pleased by the understated elegance of it all. That was 3 months ago. Now Sarah sat in her new office, larger than her old apartment, staring at the prototype launch schedule for her logistics platform. Marriage to Maxwell had brought changes she'd never expected, and not just the obvious ones like moving into his penthouse or attending corporate functions. He'd kept his word about her project. Within weeks of their wedding, she had a team of developers, a substantial budget, and complete creative control. The platform was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Small businesses were already lining up for the beta testing phase, but it was the other changes that kept her awake at night. Like the way Maxwell automatically made her coffee every morning, remembering exactly how she liked it, or how he'd taken to working late in her office some evenings, ostensibly reviewing reports, but really just keeping her company. the way he unconsciously reached for her hand at social functions, then seemed surprised to find it already there. They were getting too good at this pretense. Or maybe... A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. Maxwell stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Sarah nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She noticed he'd loosened his tie, something he only did when stressed. "Preston Global's CEO is coming to dinner tonight," Maxwell said without preamble. "At our home." Sarah's stomach tightened. They'd been careful to maintain professional distance at work, but their home was different territory. "All right," she said carefully. "What do they want?" "To see us, together, in our natural habitat, so to speak." Maxwell ran a hand through his hair. "Richard Preston is old school. He believes you can tell everything about a man by how he lives with his wife. This dinner could make or break the merger. So we need to convince him we're madly in love?" Sarah's tone was sharper than she intended. "We need to convince him we're real," Maxwell corrected softly. "That this isn't just another corporate marriage of convenience." The irony hung heavy between them. "I'll handle dinner," Sarah said, already making mental notes. "My mother's recipe for beef bourguignon should impress no caterers." Maxwell looked surprised. Would a loving wife who grew up cooking with her mother hire caterers for an intimate dinner party? Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Besides, you've eaten my cooking before." It was true. Despite having a professional chef on call, they'd fallen into a routine of Sarah cooking dinner several nights a week. Maxwell would help, usually making a mess but learning slowly. Those quiet evenings in their kitchen, talking about everything and nothing, had become dangerous. "Point taken," Maxwell smiled, then hesitated. "Sarah, about tonight. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for," she reminded him. "Convincing people this marriage is real was part of the deal." "Right, the deal." Something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. But before Sarah could analyze it, his professional mask slipped back into place. "I'll have my assistant clear your afternoon so you can prepare." After he left, Sarah leaned back in her chair, trying to ignore the familiar ache in her chest. This was the problem with their arrangement. The lines kept blurring. Every time she thought she had her feelings under control, Maxwell would do or say something that made her wonder if maybe, but wondering was dangerous. This was business. Just business. That evening, Sarah was putting the finishing touches on dinner when Maxwell arrived home early. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, staring at her. She changed into a simple black dress, her hair down the way she knew he liked it, though she tried not to think about why she'd made that choice. "You look..." he started, then cleared his throat. "Can I help with anything?" Sarah pointed to the wine bottles on the counter. "Choose something appropriate? You're better at that than I am." Maxwell moved to the wine rack, but his eyes kept straying to her as she moved around the kitchen. "It smells amazing in here." "My mother's recipes never fail," Sarah said, then added softly, "She would have loved this kitchen." Maxwell knew Sarah's mother had died when she was young. Without thinking, he crossed the kitchen and squeezed her shoulder gently. "She would have been proud of you." Sarah looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. For a moment, neither of them moved. The doorbell shattered the moment. "That's them," Maxwell said, stepping back quickly. "I'll get it." Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her dress. Showtime. Richard Preston was exactly what Sarah had expected. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, old money personified. His wife Catherine was a surprise, though. Warm, unpretentious, genuinely interested in Sarah's background and career. "Maxwell tells me you're developing a revolutionary logistics platform," Richard said over dinner. "Quite ambitious for someone so young." "Sarah's always been ambitious," Maxwell replied before she could speak. "It's one of the things I first noticed about her." The warmth in his voice made Sarah's heart skip. He was good at this. Sometimes too good. "And how did you two meet?" Catherine asked, smiling. "Office romance?" Sarah and Maxwell exchanged a glance. They'd rehearsed this story, but somehow it felt different telling it here, in their home. I noticed her long before she noticed me, Maxwell said, his eyes still on Sarah. She was always the last one in the office, working on new ideas, pushing for better solutions. I'd walk past her desk at night and see her there, completely absorbed in her work. This wasn't part of their rehearsed story. Sarah's hands tightened on her wine glass. One day, Maxwell continued, I overheard her arguing with a senior manager about efficiency improvements in our shipping routes. She was right, he was wrong, and she wasn't backing down despite his position. Her integrity, her passion. I couldn't look away after that. Sarah stared at him. He was describing real events, real moments, but painting them in a light she'd never considered. And you, Sarah, Catherine prompted gently. When did you fall for Maxwell? Sarah opened her mouth to recite their practice story, but something else entirely came out. He remembers how everyone takes their coffee, she said softly, from the janitor to the board members. I thought it was his assistant keeping track, but it's not. He just notices people, cares about details others would consider beneath them. Now it was Maxwell's turn to stare at her. The best marriages, Richard Preston said, raising his glass, are built on mutual respect and shared values. I think my concerns about history repeating itself were unfounded. Later, after their guests had left with warm hugs and promises of future dinner parties, Sarah and Maxwell stood in their kitchen in loaded silence. The evening had gone perfectly, maybe too perfectly. You weren't following the script, Sarah said finally, loading dishes into the dishwasher. Neither were you. Maxwell handed her another plate. Why did you mention the coffee thing? Because it's true. Sarah kept her eyes on the dishes. Why did you talk about seeing me work late? Because it's true. The silence stretched between them, full of unspoken questions. Sarah, Maxwell began. Maxwell, just as his phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. It's the Hong Kong office. I have to take it, Sarah said quickly, almost relieved. I'll finish up here. Maxwell hesitated, then answered the phone and walked toward his home office. Sarah waited until she heard his door close, before letting out a shaky breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to notice things like how his eyes crinkled when he really smiled, or how he subconsciously moved closer to her when she was nervous at social functions. She wasn't supposed to look forward to their quiet evenings at home, wasn't supposed to miss him when he was traveling for business. This was business, just business. But as she finished cleaning up, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the way Maxwell had looked at her when she talked about the coffee, like she'd surprised him by noticing something he thought no one saw. Like maybe she wasn't the only one struggling with blurring lines. In his office, Maxwell paced while half listening to his Hong Kong manager's report. His mind kept drifting back to dinner, to the way Sarah's eyes had softened when she talked about him, to the genuine warmth in her voice that no amount of acting could fake. He was in dangerous territory. This marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. He'd sworn he wouldn't repeat his father's mistakes, wouldn't risk his heart or the company on something as unpredictable as love. But watching Sarah cook in their kitchen, seeing her charm the Prestons with her genuine warmth and intelligence, hearing her talk about him with such unexpected insight, Maxwell was starting to realize he might have already broken his most important rule: never fall in love with your business partner. 6 months into their marriage, everything started falling apart. The merger was nearly complete. Sarah's logistics platform was weeks away from launch, and their carefully maintained balance had been working perfectly until Maxwell's ex-fiancée decided to resurface. Victoria Sterling swept into Blackwood Industries like a hurricane in designer heels, claiming she had urgent business with the board. She was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, blonde, from an old money family, and completely at ease in Maxwell's world. Sarah was reviewing final testing reports when Victoria appeared in her office doorway. "So, this is what he replaced me with?" Victoria said, her smile sharp as a knife. How quaint. The little employee who worked her way up. Sarah set down her tablet slowly. "Can I help you with something, Ms. Sterling?" "Oh, I just wanted to see it for myself." Victoria walked in uninvited, running a manicured finger along Sarah's desk. "The woman Maxwell chose over me? Tell me, does he still work until 3 a.m.? Still cancel dinner plans for emergency board meetings? My relationship with my husband isn't your concern." "Husband?" Victoria laughed. "Is that what you think you are to him? Sweetie, Maxwell doesn't do love. He does business. And once the merger is complete," she leaned forward, dropping her voice, "well, let's just say I know things about your perfect marriage that would interest the Preston family greatly." Sarah's heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" "Bank transfers to your father's medical account, the convenient timing of your logistics project's funding. It's all very neat, isn't it? Almost like a business transaction." Ice filled Sarah's veins. How had Victoria found out? "Get out," Sarah said quietly. "Gladly. But think about this. When the truth comes out, what do you think will happen to your precious project? To all those jobs Maxwell claims he's saving?" Victoria's smile was triumphant. "Unless, of course, you convince him to step down voluntarily. Let someone more suitable take over." After Victoria left, Sarah sat frozen at her desk. Everything they'd worked for was in danger. The merger, the jobs, her platform, all of it could collapse if Victoria exposed their arrangement. She needed to find Maxwell, but Maxwell found her first, bursting into her office minutes later. "Sarah, whatever Victoria said to you—" "She knows," Sarah interrupted, "about everything. The arrangement, the timing, even the payments for my father's medical bills." Maxwell's face went pale. "I'll handle it. She's just trying to take back what she thinks is hers." Sarah stood, her voice shaking. "Maybe she's right. Maybe this was all a mistake. Sarah, don't. Look at us, Maxwell. Living this elaborate lie, pretending we're something we're not. Victoria's right. You don't do love. This was business from the start." "Is that what you really think?" Maxwell's voice was dangerously quiet. "That this is still just business?" Sarah couldn't look at him. I think I need some air." She grabbed her purse and fled, ignoring Maxwell calling her name. She walked for hours through downtown Chicago, her mind racing. Every moment with Maxwell played through her head, the quiet dinners, the late-night conversations, the way he'd held her hand at her father's last doctor's appointment. When had the pretense become real? When had her heart stopped following the contract's rules? Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Maxwell, but she couldn't face him yet, not until she figured out what to do. Finally, as evening fell, she found herself at the small Chinese restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation. To her surprise, Maxwell was already there, sitting at their old table. "How did you know?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "Because I know you," he said simply. He said, "Better than Victoria ever knew me, better than anyone has." Sarah stared at the plastic tablecloth. "She's going to expose us." "No, she won't." Maxwell's voice was firm. "Because there's nothing to expose anymore." Sarah looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean this stopped being a business arrangement months ago, and I'm tired of pretending it didn't." Maxwell reached across the table, taking her hand. "I love you, Sarah, not because of any contract or merger, but because you see me, really see me. You notice things no one else does, challenge me when I'm wrong, make me want to be better." Sarah's heart pounded. "Maxwell, I know you're scared. I am too. My father destroyed every real relationship he ever had, and I swore I'd never risk that kind of pain. But loving you, it's the most real thing I've ever felt." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "What about Victoria, the merger?" "Victoria can do her worst, too. The merger's already secure. Preston Global signed the final papers this morning. But even if they hadn't," Maxwell squeezed her hand, "you're worth more than any deal." "I love you too," Sarah whispered, the truth of it finally setting free. "I tried so hard not to, but—" Maxwell stood, pulling her up and into his arms, right there in the middle of the restaurant. Their kiss tasted of tears and truth and promises that had nothing to do with business. Later that night, they lay tangled together on their couch, Sarah's head on Maxwell's chest. "What about the 2-year contract?" she asked. tracing patterns on his shirt. Maxwell kissed her forehead. "Burn it. I want forever with you, if you'll have me. Forever's a long time," Sarah teased, but her heart was soaring. "Not long enough," Maxwell said seriously. "Not for all the dinners I want to cook with you, the morning coffees I want to share, the moments I want to spend just watching you work on your dreams." Sarah lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "When did you know that this was real? Remember that dinner with the Prestons, when you talked about how I remember everyone's coffee order?" Maxwell smiled. "That's when I realized you saw past the CEO, in past the wealth and the name. You saw me." Sarah touched his cheek gently. "And I fell in love with what I saw." The next morning they walked into Blackwood Industries together, hands clasped. Victoria was waiting in the lobby with a manila envelope, her smile triumphant. Maxwell took one look at the envelope and laughed. "Save yourself the trouble, Victoria. There's no scandal here. Just a man who fell in love with an amazing woman who happened to work for his company." "A woman," Sarah added, "who fell in love right back." Victoria's face turned red. "You're making a mistake, Maxwell. She's not one of us." "No," Maxwell agreed, pulling Sarah closer. "She's better. She's real." They left Victoria standing there, her envelope of evidence useless against the truth of what they'd found together. In the elevator, Sarah looked at their reflection in the mirrored walls, the CEO and the former logistics coordinator, an unlikely match that somehow made perfect sense. "Ready to face the world, Mrs. Blackwood?" Maxwell asked, squeezing her hand. Sarah smiled, remembering all the moments that had led them here. "With you, always." Some things they'd learned were worth more than any business deal. Love, as it turned out, was the best investment of all. What would you do in Sarah's position? Would you accept a marriage of convenience to help save thousands of jobs and achieve your dreams? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And what about Maxwell? Do you think someone can truly change when they find the right person? Did he deserve Sarah's love in the end? Some moments in life force us to choose between our principles and the greater good. Sarah chose to take a risk that changed not just her life, but the lives of thousands of employees. What would you have done differently? Let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment in the story? Did you expect Victoria's appearance at the end? Do you believe in arranged marriages that turn into real love? What do you think happened to Sarah's logistics platform after they got together? If you enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and following your dreams, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to never miss our upcoming stories. Remember, life's greatest love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. See you in our next video.